My name is Marcus, and for 13 years I believed I was married to the perfect woman. Catherine was caring, religious, and talked about me with pride to friends and family. I was an investment manager on Wall Street, building fortunes for clients while she supposedly built our life together. This is one of those cheating wife stories you hear and think, that would never happen to me. But it did. It wasn't a dramatic discovery with screaming or explosive confrontations. It was silent, devastating. A colleague from my office pulled me aside after a meeting and said, "Marcus, I need to tell you something about Catherine." What he revealed in the next few minutes destroyed everything I knew. She wasn't cheating with one person. There were multiple, systematic. While I worked 12 hours a day to give her everything she needed, she was routinely disappearing with other men. The emotional fallout was immediate. I couldn't focus. I couldn't eat. I was left with nothing. No dignity, no trust, no answers that made sense. And when I finally confronted her, she didn't apologize. She just laughed. She laughed at my pain. This isn't a video about revenge. This is a story about rebuilding, about a man who lost everything and decided to escape to the most isolated place he could find, the frozen forests of Alaska. And it was there, in the brutal silence of nature, that I learned what Wall Street never taught me. My routine was simple and predictable. I woke up at 5 in the morning, got to the office by 6:30, and spent 12 hours analyzing markets, building portfolios, and managing millions of dollars for clients who trusted me. Catherine always said I worked too much, but she also loved the results. The Manhattan apartment, the trips to Miami on holidays, the dinners at expensive restaurants. She presented herself as the perfect wife, a devout Catholic, and everyone commented on how solid our marriage was. 13 years of marriage. 13 years building something I believed was unbreakable. Catherine didn't work outside the home. She said she preferred taking care of the house. I never questioned it. I trusted blindly. She went to the gym in the morning, met friends for lunch, attended church groups on Wednesdays. At least, that's what she said. I never suspected. Why would I? She was attentive, caring, and every night she waited for me with dinner ready. The first signs started subtle. Small inconsistencies that my financial analyst brain should have caught, but my heart ignored. She started going out more. Her answers were vague, almost irritated when I asked for details. Her phone, which used to be forgotten, was now always with her, always face down, always on silent. When it rang, she'd disappear to another room. I started noticing, but I didn't start acting. Everything changed on a Tuesday in March. I was at the office reviewing quarterly reports when Paul, a colleague from my department, knocked on my office door with an expression I'd never seen on him before. He closed the door behind him and said, "Marcus, I need to tell you something about Catherine." My stomach froze. He hesitated but continued. "There are rumors going around. At the club where you and she are members, several guys are talking about her." My world started falling apart right there, in that room overlooking the Hudson. I got home that night earlier than usual. I sat next to her and asked directly, "Are you cheating on me?" She didn't even blink. She just turned her face to me with a cold smile and said, "Marcus, you're being paranoid." But her eyes gave me the truth. That night, I slept in the guest room, and in the following days I hired a private investigator. What he discovered wasn't one affair. It was an entire web of lies that had lasted for years. If this story makes sense to you, comment what you think is going to happen and what else I'm going to discover. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me bring more content like this. Now, want to know what happened when the whole truth came out? I'm going to reveal it now. The private investigator I hired was named David. 3 days after our first meeting, he called me and asked to meet in person. When I opened the folder he placed in front of me, I felt my stomach turn. Photos, dates, times, locations, everything documented with surgical precision. Catherine wasn't just cheating on me with one person. There were multiple. The personal trainer from the gym, the yoga instructor, a guy from the church group. The emotional fallout was immediate and devastating. I couldn't focus in meetings. My colleagues noticed. Paul pulled me aside again and said, "Marcus, you need to take some days off. You're not okay." But how do you take days off when your entire life is falling apart? I started drinking more. Scotch in the late afternoon. Anything to numb the pain burning in my chest. The worst came a week later. The rumors were already circulating. At the club, in social circles, among acquaintances, everyone knew. A client of mine, during a business lunch, made a comment about keeping your wife happy at home with a smile that told me everything. He knew. And if he knew, how many more knew? The public humiliation was almost worse than the betrayal itself. It was my dignity that was destroyed. I confronted Catherine again, this time with the evidence in hand. I put the photos on the dining table and waited. She looked, sighed, and finally admitted it. "You were never home, Marcus. What did you expect?" Those words broke me. She was putting the blame on me. That night, something inside me died. It wasn't anger, it was emptiness. And it was in that emptiness that I made the most radical decision of my life. I didn't seek revenge, but I knew she'd pursue a messy divorce to publicly expose the situation and wear me down. I needed to escape that spectacle. I got my best lawyer to negotiate a quick exit deal. She'd keep the apartment and most of the liquid assets, and in return, I'd get the divorce signed within 48 hours, with a mutual confidentiality clause. It was a terrible financial deal for me, an insult to an investment manager. But I bought my freedom and silence. I transferred what was left of my funds to simple accounts and started planning my exit. I needed a place where Wall Street didn't exist. 15 days later, I was on a plane to Alaska. The flight to Anchorage lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of silence. When the plane landed, the difference was immediate. I rented a 4x4 truck and drove for 3 hours until I got close to Denali. The road was surrounded by snow-covered mountains, dense forests, and an emptiness so big it seemed to swallow any sound. The farther I got from civilization, the more I felt like I was leaving Marcus behind. The cabin I bought online was more rustic than the photos suggested. There was no internet, no cell signal. The electricity came from a generator I'd need to learn to operate. The water came from a well I'd need to pump manually. Everything was manual. Everything required physical effort. Everything required me to be present. This was my refuge now. The first night was the hardest. I lit the wood stove because the temperature dropped drastically. I sat in an old wooden chair and just stayed there. There was nothing to distract my mind from reality. And it was in that silence that everything came to the surface. The anger, the humiliation, the pain. I cried for the first time since discovering the betrayal. I cried because I was alone in a place where no one could see me. The first few days were about basic survival, learning to keep the fire going, understanding which tools to use to cut wood. Each task was simple, but required total attention. My hands, which used to type on keyboards and sign million-dollar contracts, now bled from cutting wood. My muscles, which only knew air-conditioned gyms before, now ached from carrying heavy logs. But something strange started to happen. The physical pain started to ease the emotional pain. On the 5th day, I left the cabin at dawn and stood on the porch watching the mountains. Snow covered everything. The air was so clean it burned my lungs. There was no traffic noise, just the wind passing through the trees. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something different from anger and pain. I felt a clean emptiness, a space where something new could grow. I knew I needed to be there to find out. The following weeks became a routine of physical work I never knew on Wall Street. I woke up with the natural light coming through the windows. I lit the fire. I made coffee in an old coffee maker that required patience. I put on heavy clothes and went out to cut wood. There were no meetings to attend, no emails to answer, just the task in front of me and the sound of the axe cutting wood. I learned that manual work had an honesty that corporate work never had. I started fixing things around the cabin, the roof, the fence, the generator. Each project was a distraction. Each completed task was a small victory. And somewhere between fixing a roof and rebuilding a fence, I realized I wasn't thinking about Catherine. I was just working. The nature around me was brutal and indifferent. On Wall Street, everything revolved around egos and manipulation. Here, in Alaska, nature didn't lie. If you didn't cut wood, you froze. If you didn't fix the roof, you got wet. It was simple. It was honest. It was real. My body changed. I lost the weight I carried from corporate dinners. I gained muscles from carrying logs. My hands, once soft, now had permanent calluses. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the man looking back. But for the first time in months, I felt respect. Respect for having survived. Respect for choosing to rebuild. One afternoon, while stacking wood, I stopped and looked at the mountains. The sun was setting, and for the first time since I arrived, I smiled. It wasn't a forced smile. It was genuine. I realized that Wall Street never taught me to feel this, never taught me that honest work brings real satisfaction, never taught me that rebuilding yourself doesn't require millions of dollars. It just requires courage to start over. Manual work transformed me, but something was still missing. If you want to know how I finally let go of the weight I was carrying, leave your like and comment what you'd do in my place. And if this journey is making sense to you, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything. 3 months after arriving in Alaska, I was sitting on the porch, watching the forest routine. My body was at peace, but my mind wasn't yet. The anger toward Catherine, the anger toward myself, was something silent and persistent. I had escaped geographically, but the hurt had followed me. I understood that running away physically wasn't enough. I needed to free myself emotionally, too. I realized I needed to forgive, not because Catherine deserved it, but because I needed to free myself from the weight of carrying hate to my grave. I started writing. I grabbed an old notebook and started putting everything on paper. The pain, the anger, the memories, the unanswered questions. I wrote letters to Catherine I'd never send. I wrote about the man I was on Wall Street, obsessed with status. I wrote about the man I was becoming, someone who measured success in cut wood and fixed fences. And somewhere between those pages, I started to forgive Marcus for being blind. I started to forgive Catherine for being who she was. I started to accept that some things just happen. One cold morning, I took all the letters I wrote and burned them in the wood stove. I watched the paper turn to ashes as the fire consumed words that once had so much power over me. It was a simple, silent moment, but as I watched the ashes rise through the chimney, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: lightness. It doesn't mean I forgot what happened, but it means I stopped letting it define who I was. I decided to stay in Alaska permanently. I sold what was left of my Manhattan assets remotely. I canceled everything that connected me to that life, and I started building something new. I don't know if I'll be in a relationship again, but I know I found something here that Wall Street could never give me: real purpose, honest work, and the freedom to be a man who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone except himself. Today, 6 months after leaving New York, I wake up to the sound of birds instead of car horns. My mornings start cutting wood instead of reading market reports. My hands are calloused, my body is stronger, and my mind is clearer than it's ever been. Catherine? She became a distant memory. I learned that rebuilding doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow process made of small daily decisions. Choosing to work instead of ruminate, choosing to build instead of destroy, choosing to forgive instead of carrying hate. Wall Street taught me how to make money. Alaska taught me how to live. If you're going through something similar, know this: you don't need to escape to Alaska like I did, but you need to escape the mental prison that betrayal creates. You need to find your own refuge, whether in a cabin, on a farm, or in a new routine that takes you away from what destroyed you. And when you're ready, you need to forgive. Not for the person who betrayed you, but for yourself. Because in the end, the greatest revenge isn't destroying who hurt you. It's rebuilding yourself so well that they become irrelevant. And I became irrelevant to Catherine, but more importantly, she became irrelevant to me. If this story helped you in any way, or if you know someone who needs to hear this, leave your like and share. Comment which part impacted you the most. I want to know if you've been through something similar. And if you want more real stories of new beginnings and overcoming, subscribe to the channel.